Good morning, folks. Welcome to Atomic Game Theory, the show where we are using conflict theory and math to take a look at the small differences that can make, big major changes between winning and losing your favorite games. I almost have that patterned down from our videos from the past. Oh, goodness. I'm so excited for today. We've got a lot that I want to talk about. I want to take a look at two of my favorite games to break out at a game night and work through, and some of the major details that work in both of them. We've got probabilities, we've got choices, we got strategy, we got tactics, we got all sorts of stuff. We have stuff that I love to talk about. I'm really excited. Oh my gosh, Atomic Game Theory. There we go. I like to put my chyrons up so you know I'm doing good work. My name is Richard. If you have any questions during the show, you can check in on Twitch. Of course, during the chat there, I will check in as much as I can, get some of your questions as we're going. You can also tweet at me at rmalina, and I will be able to take your questions, your information right there. So we'll get it all done. Oh my goodness, let's check in with the chat real quick. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to see friends here watching, checking this whole thing out. Hi everybody. Oh my gosh, you're wonderful. I'm glad the school's in session. The clock said yes, that it was time to go. Oven o'clock is 11 o'clock. That's when we start. All right, so let's get started today. Let's just jump into it. I'm really excited. I want to talk about Machi Koro first. So I want to look at two games today that are both tableau builders. And a tableau building game is a pretty interesting one because it's like a deck builder in a sense, right? In a deck builder, you are building your deck. In this one, you are building your tableau, which is not a thing we think about a whole lot, but you are basically purchasing cards to place in front of you where they will be constantly active all the time, right? That is our goal here with Machi Koro. As the game progresses, our tableau will get more and more interesting and exciting. And so, let's take a look at what Machi Koro might look like. There we go. The Machi Koro board. Here we go. So, what we have in front of us is just a ton of cards. I mean, that's what Machi Koro is, cards all day long. And you are trying to gather them. There's also a pair of dice and a bunch of money. That's the entire game. So get ready. You'll notice at the top of these cards, just taking a quick look, that there are multiple colors. There are 4 colors: blue, green, red, and purple. There are also a bunch of numbers up at the top, a little bit harder to see maybe. Down beneath that, of course, we have descriptions of each card and what they do, a little bit of artwork, a little bit of a name, a symbol, an amount of money down here at the bottom. This bottom right is how much it costs to purchase this. So the way that this game works is that you are rolling one die. You're going to roll that on your turn, and basically when you do that, every card that you have with that number on it is going to activate. When we take a look at how that works, you may gain money, you may lose some money. It kind of depends on what's going on in the game. And you were trying to gather a bunch of money to purchase things to put into your engine so that more things activate, so that it just builds and builds and builds and ramps. And that's the big idea with Machi Koro in general. Up at the top, we have the blue cards. The blue cards are the basically money generation cards. Those are some of my favorite ones. We have things like wheat fields, a ranch, a flower orchard, a forest. I have an expansion mixed in here, so I'm pretty sure I got all the main regular cards, but you'll forgive me, I hope, if I left one of the expansion ones in there. What these do is they activate on your turn. Perfect, that's great. So if I roll a 6 or if I roll a 1 and I have a pair of wheat fields, both of these are going to activate, and I'm going to gain whatever it says at the bottom. It says 1 coin from the bank. That's perfect. That's fantastic. The blue cards also activate on anyone's turn. So even if someone else is playing and they roll the die, if they roll a 1, my wheat fields are going to activate. I'm going to generate income, which is going to, again, let me buy things in the future. So blue cards are really good. They help us do all sorts of things. They give us money on everyone's turn. The green cards activate only on your turn. It's good color coding here. They do slightly different things. It kind of depends. The more advanced ones have to do with those symbols that were on them, like a wheat field is a little wheat symbol. A forest has like a gear. I guess it takes machines to deal with a forest. And a furniture factory needs you to have forests. It'll make money based on how many forests that you have. There are also the red cards. Red cards only activate on other players' turns. And they basically mess with other players if they happen to roll those numbers. Let's see. So we are building up all of these to get this ridiculous tableau. I've just got a big example of it down here. and trying to make money as frantically as possible. The game is a race because you in Machi Koro, theme, let's go. You are a city developer. That's what you're up to. You're trying to develop the best city the fastest. And what does that take? Well, it takes these out here. It takes 4 specific accomplishments to make your city perfect. And the first one to build all 4 of those wins the game. That's it. It's great. What are those? Well, they are all game changers. All 4 of these are big, big moves, much larger than kind of the set that we have here. This array will allow us to make a bunch of money, but these cards are going to start changing things. First rule, first thing to notice, you only get to roll 1 die. Let's talk about this because there's a 9 right here. There's a 10 right here. You can't possibly roll those on 1 die. You have to build a train station before you are allowed to roll 1 or 2 die. 1 or 2 dice, excuse me. They're both, it's plural now. It doesn't really matter. What was I going to say? You have to choose, and you have to, if you roll 2 dice, take the total. So at the start of the game, these low numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, are scoring for you pretty constantly, and you're probably going to build those up because, well, 1, they're cheaper, and 2, you want those numbers to work out faster. But as the game progresses, you may end up starting to roll 2 dice, and those early institutions aren't going to be worth a whole lot, which is why some of the higher level ones give you more money. Like, for example, whereas a wheat field will give you 1 gold on your turn, an apple orchard will give you 3, a mine will give you 5. Super helpful. Also, there are these 7s and 8, these like major ones, these factories, and they say, hey, did you build up a whole bunch of ranches before that? Cool. Well, now you own a cheese factory, and so for all those sheep or cows or whatever that you've got, we're going to make a whole bunch of cheese for you. And that's pretty fantastic. So train station starts changing the game very dramatically and starts making choices for you. This is a card I want to talk about quite a bit today because probability is weird and terrible, and this game is a little tougher to figure out as it continues. Although I'm sure we've all had practice with it, so I won't say it's impossible because we're here. The shopping mall is kind of a more minor one. It allows all of your cups, which are your like offensive cards, the ones that mess with other players, and certain other ones, your greens, like your low-level greens, will all start giving you extra coins whenever those come up, which is very, very handy. And these cost a ton of money in order to make. So these are like big purchases that you're trying to save up for and get in 1 turn. The biggest number on the board, I believe, is a 6 for the mine right here. The shopping mall costs you 10 for 16, excuse me. The amusement park. And the amusement park says if you roll doubles, you get to take another turn. That's it's huge. It's huge. I love it. It's just an enormous change. And then number 22. For 22, you get a radio tower. Once every turn, you can just choose to re-roll your dice. So if you have both of these up and you're like, I didn't get doubles, I'm going to roll again, and you get doubles, well, then you get another turn too. So there's a ton of stuff that you can do with these. Not that you are likely to get a lot of turns using them, because again, once you're at the point where you are building these things, you're ending the game pretty darn quick. Let's see. We kind of rushed through that a little bit. Let's see if we made all of that make sense. Crow says, Crow Gold, this is a game I always see at the game store, and I'm attracted by the bright, colorful box, but could never figure out what it was. Absolutely, right? This game looks really cool. I really, really enjoy it. It's got cool colors, cool artwork. And the dice, the money, like it all fits really well. It's got great components. It makes sense, and it is one of the best games I can think of to start understanding how probability works. Which is good. It is basically SimCity, the board game, but competitive, right? It's because you're trying really, really hard to beat everybody else to get these 4 major components. It's unclear to me theme-wise if we are all city planners in Machi Koro, or if we have like 4 alternate universes Machi Koro, you know? Because how many amusement parks can one city have? Let's be real, and I live in Los Angeles, and I'm saying that. Or radio towers, shopping malls, train stations. I mean, that's a ton of stuff going on. What makes this game really, really cool? The build. It's the build. Machi Koro is all about this endless build, this ramp up from the slow first turns where you have like a few golds. So you buy a wheat field, you buy a ranch that gets you like 1 coin sometimes. As the game progresses, you're going to start making dramatically more money. Which is wild because at the same time, people are also buying these red cards, which are stealing your money at a pretty dramatic rate. So you need to make this wacky balance in between. I want to make as much money as possible, but also I'm going to have a hard time saving my money because people are going to steal my money all the time. These huge advancements, like these game churning, if you will, advancements are pushing you to keep stockpiling a bunch of money, but you could just spend that money on smaller buildings and then make more money. And is that race good? Do I want to do that as I'm working through? It gets tricky. There are also purple cards, and I have barely mentioned the purple cards. There's the stadium right here. The stadium says get 2 coins from all players on your turn, but there are more than one purple card, and you can have a certain number, a different number of them in the game. There is a TV station, which lets you steal 5 cards from any one player, but only on your turn. A publisher. Get 1 coin from each player for every one of their red establishments and every one of their low-level green establishments. That's rough, although they come with 6 and 7s, which are things that are going to come up, vaguely often on your turn, right? A business center will allow you to trade establishments with another player. So if they have spent a whole bunch of money on a mine and you are starting to roll 2 dice and you have a business center, you can trade it out, trade the mine of theirs for like one of your junky things that you don't care about anymore. There are a lot of different options in here, and there's so many, and there's so many ways to play this game that this is kind of like core mode right here. There was a great expansion called the Harbor expansion, and it, in many ways, I think, makes this game more interesting by randomizing the cards that are available to you at any moment. What that one does instead is it takes all of these cards and it shuffles them up with a bunch of new ones, and there's only a few of them out at any one time for you to purchase from. It is possible that some of those stacks will build up pretty tall, so you cycle through until there's a certain number of unique buildings that are out in play. If you get one that's something that's already out, you just stack it onto the pile and you build it up a little bit. But if something is like there's only one of them and someone buys it, well, we're going to get a new type of building out. It might be the same one, but it certainly might not. And so you are trying to work with that to figure out your best strategy. And it adds some new cards, which are wild. I mean, first of all, there are 2 new establishments that once they allow you to change die rolls, which is very cool. There are more 1s and there are more 12s. There's a 12 to 14, a tuna boat. One of the 1s is like a sushi house, and they start dramatically changing what happens and lets you push numbers around. And so you get a little bit more choice about what comes up on your turn. It's a ton of fun. The randomness is wild. It's a little bit terrifying, I'll be honest. But it's fun. It's fun. I like this game a lot. I like the Harbor expansion a lot, and it is really, really one that I like to bring out at a board game night to be like, hey, board games, okay, I'm not going to jump in with Dominion. I'm going to say that. Like, at a game night, I don't want you to sit down with a very difficult game and have to make huge, terrifying choices all the time. This is a game where you are rewarded for basically any choice you make. Yes, there are builds that are probably better than others, but for the most part, as long as you're buying things, every turn you take is better than the one that came before. And that, no matter who you are and how experienced you are at games, that's a very positive place to be. So I highly recommend this game. Oh my gosh. Crow mentions that this could be a very, very, very LA specific version of the game. Absolutely. It's definitely a Japanese game to start, and I know that Machi Koro has been published by a lot of different people over the last 10 years. I think it's about 10 years old. So, I mean, we could have licensed it for any city we wanted, and that would have been fantastic. Oh my gosh. Okay, so let's see. Anything else I have to say on Machi Koro? I mean, honestly, while I wanted to talk about it first, it is a pretty straightforward game. The biggest choice comes in, and the hardest thing about this game, and I think the thing that, let's see if I can phrase this right, the thing that allows you to be a better player at this game, the strategic choice you want to get better at making, is knowing when to stop rolling 1 die and start rolling 2 dice. Because the game changes dramatically. Like I said, is it possible? I'm never going to roll a 1 again if I do that. If my strategy is on wheat fields, I'm doomed. 1s will never come up. 5s and 6s, and those are going to come up a little bit more still. Those are still likely to happen. It's pretty rare my 2 is going to get rolled. So while it is fine with 1 die with 2, whatever. And the probability changes there very, very specifically, right? We are very good. So what I want to talk about today is about humans and how bad we are at probability. So we are very good at looking at one die and saying, I know what the possibilities are, because there's 6 faces on a die and I could roll any of them with an equal probability. There was a, oh my goodness, his name was the Chevalier du Maire in the 1700s. And he is a noble, he is a gambler, he's a monster who walks around and he says, because I don't know, we don't have dice back then. I mean, we do. They've been around for thousands of years, but apparently not as often as we do today. Like when I'm teaching geometry class and I start mentioning the Platonic solids and they're like, that's a D10, or excuse me, no, that's a D8, that's a D12. A D10 is not a Platonic solid. It's the bad one. It's just the one that's stuck in my head. They know those terms because they've seen those dice. They're not super weird anymore. But the Chevalier du Maire, the Knight of the Sea, kept wandering around with one die, and he would make bets with people, which I love this. He would make these bets, and he would say, I bet you that I can roll this die 4 times and get a 6. And people were like, okay, sure, what's it? And he would bet with them and make a ton of money. I mean, not a ton of money. This is a game that's, if I roll this 4 times, okay, there's a 4, that's no good. I'm bouncing off cards. There we go. I win the bet, so I get your money. And this is a reasonably fair game. If we start breaking it down, I will say that mathematically, as soon as we start talking about multiple events, the math all gets harder for this, but the Chevalier du Maire, basically, with his instinctive understanding about how probability worked, which all of us could develop had we, if we want to put the time in, assume that a 6 would come up in 4 rolls, about 50% of the time, something like that. And the math is pretty darn close on that one. And that was fantastic. So he did all this, and he made a bunch of money, and he wandered around France, whatever, until people got bored with his game where he would show up with a die and roll it 4 times and make money. They were like, this is boring, stop it. And so he decided to come back with a new game later. This game, he brought 2 dice to the table, and he said, look, I bet you, and this must have been so boring, I can't even imagine. I'm going to roll these 2 dice 24 times. And I bet I get a pair of 6s once out of those 24 times. And everyone was like, hold on, what? Okay, so if it was 4 times before for 1 die, but now you got 2 dice, and so maybe 4 times 6 is 24, and it was all this, sure, maybe that's a fair bet. I don't know, let's try it out, let's see what happens. And so they would watch this guy roll 2 dice 24 times. And what happened was the Chevalier du Maire went broke. He made no money off this. It was terrible. People took the bet and they won all the time, just constantly. And he didn't understand it. He was like, I don't get it. There's 2, the difference between 1 die and 2 shouldn't be that dramatic. It was 4 before. I mean, now there's 6 new options to go. Like, sure, shouldn't it be 24? Oh my gosh. And so he wrote to his good friend, and oh my gosh, I may be mixing my math at the moment. I believe it was Blaise Pascal, and who decided to start looking at the probability of this gambling moment and was able to use that to build our foundational knowledge of probability. But it's very strange that even though we understand how one of these works, when we get a second one involved, everything goes out the window, which is pretty brutal. Now, if you are a D&D player, I don't know why I'm still on Machi Koro. It's just a lovely board. I just love looking at these cards. They're bright and shiny. If you're a D&D player, you probably know a lot more about probability and how dice work in tandem, in pairs, in groups, right? You could probably calculate the average damage of a fireball with 5d6 dice or 8d6 dice or whatever we wanted to do. And we'd be a lot more used to that because we roll those more often and we want the outcomes to be in our favor, so we build up a better understanding of that. But probability is really, really, really frustrating. And in order to do that, to talk a little bit more about that, I want to go to our other tool of probability, decks of cards. This is my my fantastic Dragon Age Inquisition deck, which is one of my favorites. All the cards have art from the game. I love Dragon Age Inquisition. Like, that's, I know a lot of people are like Skyrim folks, but Dragon Age was my game. Oh, there we go. There's Solus right there. This is one that I found at PAX, and I was like, I must track this deck down. It will be mine. This deck right here is very easily. It's still ordered. I mean, we got all our suits in order. Blah 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 blah. Right? All of our numbers are in order. I could shuffle this deck a whole bunch of times, and a very common theme among magicians is, oh my gosh, the deck is so random, you will never be able to find anything in it. Because when we think a deck is in order, we think about it in this specific order right here, from like ace to king or whatever, colors in order, whatever else we want. There's like the deck that we see when it comes out of a package. There are multiple ways to organize this deck that certainly look disordered to, the regular folk, but have a specific order involved to any sort of magician. But there is a thing that we talk about a whole lot with decks of cards, which is that once we shuffle them a whole bunch, it is probably unlike any deck that has ever been shuffled before in the world, in human history, ever. Or, well, will be is a little harder, but probably. Which doesn't make any sense. There are 52 cards in this deck. There are 52 cards in this deck. There should be a method where, I shuffle it and then you shuffle it. And the odds that they're that different, how really meaningful is that? How different could they possibly be? I will say that this number changes based on how many times we shuffle it. I mean, if it's in this perfect order, well, mine's a little bit out of perfect order. But if it's in like factory settings and we each shuffle it once and we both cut it kind of in the middle, I mean, if the ace of spades is the bottom card in that deck, it's probably still near the bottom of the deck, which is not true randomness in any way. So the more we shuffle this deck, the more random it'll get. The more we use them, the more random it is supposed to get. Right? So are there any guesses out there? Have we seen this before? Are we ready for this? Oh my gosh. The number of ways that you can organize a deck of cards is mathematically it is 52 factorial, which is this number right here. 80 unventillion ways to order a deck of cards. All the way down. This is all the way looking at the top card, going all the way to the bottom. If you track that pattern, that will be one of these 80 unventillion. That's not a number I use very often. Possibilities, which is absurd. This is a number that doesn't make any sense. It's a number that especially doesn't make sense because it comes from 52 objects in the first place, right? So that is a number that when I look at, I don't believe. I just don't. It's so hard to believe, even though it is true. Not because I am being like, I don't know, wittingly disbelieving about this thing and just being terrible about it, but just because it's huge. That number doesn't, well, one, it doesn't make sense. It's too big to make sense. And number two, it's just a deck of cards. It's just a deck of cards. So we really have to start breaking into kind of the mathematics of how we get this. And so this number we arrive at in a very, very specific way. Like I said, very start, it's 52 factorial. That means all we got to do is think about a deck this way. Take the deck in order. Top card could be any one of 52 cards. Okay, now we got a top card set. Great. Next card, 51 options left. All right, well, already for those top two cards, how many ways are there to order those? Well, there's 52 here and there's 51 here. 52 times 51. Oh my gosh, it's a big number. I'll calculate it right now. Live on Twitch is me using a calculator. 2,652. So already moving on quite a bit. If I add a third card to that, we, of course, are already up to 132,600 ways to put 3 cards in order on top of a deck. And if we continue that pattern, times 49, times 48, times 47, times 46, la 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 la, we get this beast. It's terrible. So the easiest way to understand this number is not to think about this number, because again, it's too big, but to consider every single human being throughout who has ever lived has spent their entire lives shuffling a deck of cards once every second for the 40,000 years that humanity has existed. We wouldn't get to this number. It's big. It's real big. So will we ever get to that number knowing that that is not how we choose to live our lives, is by shuffling? I mean, probably not. Doesn't seem likely. It's just too big. But it is the thing I love about probability, is just this idea that we struggle to understand how it works, and that leads us to unintuitive results. Especially when things get more complex. Like I said, you can figure out one die, but figuring out 2 dice, it's a struggle. It's a huge struggle. Doing a little bit of cleaning right here. Don't pay no attention to the figure behind the curtain. I will say this real quick, that as we start to take a look at this in a second, we're going to look at our next game real soon. I want you to remember that Machi Koro had different colored dice. I'll set those off to the side, and we'll consider that option in the future. Because our next game that we're going to take a look at is more... Oops, excuse me. Just dropping things over here like crazy. Is a little bit trickier, and they do it on purpose. And it makes my day. Ugh. Get up here, because we're going to start taking a look at one of my favorite games of all time, Valeria Card Kingdoms. I love this game. I love this game by Daily Magic Games. It is wonderful. I know they've had a second printing at this point already. The box art has changed. I'm still sticking with my old one. I love it. The art here is really, really cool. By the Miko is what he goes by, I believe. A lot of the art is, I mean, just look at, that's just, it's a style, that's for sure. And Daily Magic has taken Valeria Card Kingdoms, and they have made many games based on the Valeria name and the artwork. So a lot of these characters may seem familiar as we take a look at them. I'm gonna, let's see, maybe I'll just turn on our picture so that I can make sure that we are framed up in the right way. Cool, cool, cool. So Valeria Card Kingdoms, first of all, starts out with a whole bunch of monsters. Get up there, monster. Oops. Keep moving my monsters around. Which is cool, right? Valeria Card Kingdoms is not a city building game. It is a game where you are trying to defeat monsters, build a town, find wonders. Like, it's got a similar feel and a similar theme in a way, but it's like fantasy and awesome. So they were like, well, Machi Koro, all you do is you fight things or build cities. Forget that. Let's get bigger. You'll notice I'm putting out a couple cards. They have a number up at the top left. That is, again, the number that they activate on. So we get our townspeople here, our possible citizens, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And you start the game only with a 5 and a 6 in your hand, or in your tableau, rather. We do get a 7 and an 8, and then we get a 9, 10, and then we get an 11, 12. So during this game, what you were trying to do is activate these heroes, these citizens, these wonderful folks who are going to give you the mountain of candy pieces over here, mountain of Skittles, that you're going to need to win this game. All of these cards are split up into 2 sections. Number 1 is the number at the top is the number that it activates on when you roll that on the die, right? Down at the bottom are 2 values. There's one with a single person on it, which means that's what happens on your turn. And over on the right is what happens on anyone else's turn if they roll a 1. So a thing I like about both of these games, just to compare them, is that you as a player are active all the time. Even when you are not rolling the dice and taking your own turn, you are constantly watching, you are constantly gaining these fantastic tokens. I love them. They have like times 10 and time, so that you can just stack these. You end up the game with like 80 tokens. It's a ton of fun. So you're trying to gather these, and you do it on all players' turns, which is very cool. There are a lot of games where you take your turn and then you sit back and you wait until it's your turn again. Neither one of these are that game. So I absolutely recommend them just for that. We have a bunch of monsters at the top, which one of your goals is to fight monsters. That gives you victory points. Victory points are, this cute little ghoul right here. Here we go. Is set up with a 4 over here. That tells us how many of these red tokens that it takes to defeat it. It has a number of victory points in purple, and it has a reward at the bottom that is pretty specific. It's one, cube of your choice, one token of your choice. Oh my gosh. So You are trying to gather these to gain tokens so that you can fight monsters. On your turn, you get 2 actions, and only 2 actions. And that's after rolling the dice. And we'll get rid of these, and we'll add these big, huge number dice, which are fantastic. You roll the dice, you get 2 actions. You always roll 2 dice for this game. There's no 1 die involved. One of those actions can be purchasing a citizen. One of them can be fighting a monster. One of them can be just grabbing a token of your choice. And one of them can be grabbing some of the domains in the game, which are also the other source of victory points. We'll talk about those in just a minute. Let's see what we got here. This game is a little bit different than Machi Koro. And I want to talk about the differences. Oh, I got to check in on the chat real quick before we get there. Oh my gosh, Crow, my good friend Jonathan. This number is bonkers. I'm gonna jump in on that real quick, right? This number, totally, just keep it in your brain forever. It's the weirdest number I can think of. It's the weirdest number that I have to talk about on a regular basis because I teach a lot of probability and like statistics and algebra 2 and pre-calculus. We always look at that. That is always the number that makes every one of my students go like, this is all lies. All of it is lies. They're like, they understand the title of that book suddenly that's like statistics. Oh, there are 3 types of lies. That's a Mark Twain quote. That's right. They're lies, damn lies, and statistics. Those are the 3 types of lies. And one of them, they point at that number, and I'm like, no, that's the true thing here. It's what we do with that number that is all about lies. Anyway, I love it. Valeria, the card kingdoms of Valeria. So if we take a look at these, the biggest difference between this game and Machi Koro is actually very important, and it makes this game a ton of fun. You have your 2 dice right here, and you roll them to get a new total, whatever it is. So we'll call it a... There, I rolled a 5 and a 6. What that means is all my 5s activate, all my 6s activate, and all my 11s activate. So immediately, this game ramps. There is so much. As soon as you start buying these cards, you can buy the low-level ones, you can buy the high-level ones, you can do whatever you want, because all of them are going to activate all the time. And their prices kind of represent that. Over here on the left is the price, which is a little bit hard to see, but the 1112, the Butcher, has a price of 1, and there's a little plus on there. That means for every additional one of these you buy, it's worth an additional gold coin in order to purchase. Late in the game, that doesn't matter a whole lot because you've got so many coins. It doesn't really matter, like so many tokens, that you're basically trying to spend your 2 actions in the way to gain the most points you can, not in the most cost-efficient way sometimes. Although these are also worth points at the end of the game, so there's a little bit of thought there. But it's not hard to get these. Meanwhile, the Cleric, the 1, costs 3. The Archer, the level 4 one, and this game comes with 2 different options for each of the citizens, for each of the numbers. The 5 and 6 are always the same, but the rest of them can all be different. I have an expansion that gives me a 3rd option for all of them as well. I have, I think, 12 different monster types at this point. You only need to play with 5. And they all change the game, just depending on exactly the kind of thing you want to do. They will build different tableau engines, which we'll check in on. But 4s are always the most expensive ones. We're starting to get to the point where this is the strongest of the lower level ones, and it's the one that could potentially come up multiple ways on 2 dice as well. So not only will it come up on a 4, but on a 2-2, a 1-3, which is great. Like I said, the 5 and 6 are kind of the least powerful ones. They are the starters, but if you start building up a bunch of those, you can gain a ton of resources. Whew. Let's dig into the differences on these, because this game I find it's fascinating. I love it. I love it because it has these tokens. I mean, there's so many more tokens than these. I just didn't feel like putting them out here. And it's so good to just grab tons of these. Like on my turn, I get 12 reds, I get 5 blues, I get 8 golds. It's fun. It's fun. So let's dig in. Many of these cards will do. The Cleric is one of my favorite ones. The blue is a wild. The blue is magic, and it can either be used as gold or fight as long as you have another one with it. So this could be 3 gold. This could be 3 fight. This is just 2 stuff. It doesn't count as anything. I have to have something else to kind of give it an identity, and then I can use it as a currency. So sometimes I need blue all on its own. Some of these monsters do require some magic in order to defeat, but for the most part, it is wild, as it allows me to buy things. The Cleric gives me a bunch if I roll a 1 on my own turn, and only 1 if someone else rolls it. That is going to be true for most of these, but not all of them. For example, the Butcher. The Butcher here is our 11-12. And maybe this is an easier way to show these off. On your turn, if you roll an 11 or a 12, you get... Okay, if someone else rolls it, you get a 4. If you roll it, you get 2 for every character you have with a hammer up at the top right. So if you've got a bunch of citizens with a bunch of hammers, you can get a bunch of money on your own turn, which is how the Butcher is amazing. You focus on hammers. Those are your peasants, and those are your merchants, and those are your butchers as well. So that gets you through a lot. Rogues are 7s. The 7s are all very interesting. The rogues are kind of the most boring one. They just give you a ton of stuff. The thief is one of the few cards in this game that lets you actually steal from other players. A thing I like about this game over Machi Koro is there's very little competitiveness. You're not fighting against other players anywhere near as much because you just don't have the opportunity. If someone starts focusing on like getting those red cards in Machi Koro, I get so frustrated because they're terrible. They're painful. It means I'm not going to get to do what I want on my turn, but it's actually rare here. All I'm doing is building resources and building and building and building. It's very rare that someone's going to take anything from me as this game progresses. Let's see, any other questions in here about the setup on Valeria? Is this like a deck builder, or you're just building towards victory points? So you are going to take these cards, and as you buy them, they go in front of you, right? And that's when they activate, is when you roll the dice. And so near the end of the game, right, I'm going to be saying, I'm going to roll and I'm going to purchase. Well, what I want is like, I'm going to buy some clerics. I'm going to do this like totally divine. I'm going to get some priestesses on here too. They're all fancy. That's great. I'm going to get some merchants. And like I said, I have a 5. I've got a 6 here from the start of the game. Maybe this is the engine that is going to get me towards victory. The merchant lets me get gold or magic, my choice on my turn. Gives me a bunch of gold on other people's turns. The priestess gives me the ability. Let me pop this one up here because this is an interesting one. The priestess on my turn is going to give me some fight and some magic, and on anyone else's turn, I will be able to turn 1 magic into 3 fight. So this is a fight generating card, and it just allows you to build that up over time by swapping out your magic and getting into that. My goal here is to amass victory points. I want to do it as fast as possible because this game ends when depends on the number of players in the game, but a number of these piles run out. So there's only a certain number of butchers and priestesses. Once they're gone, that is now an empty pile. I've slapped down an exhausted card, and once enough of those are on the board, the game is over. So I can certainly see it coming because I'm able to predict what other people are kind of doing. If I see someone going with a cleric heavy strategy, the clerics are eventually going to run out. There's 6 of them, so it's not like it's a huge pile in order to get through. It's like Dominion in that sense. Once the piles run out, the game is going to end. The monsters are really interesting. All the citizens are the same. The monsters are super interesting because the deeper you get, the harder they get. Let's see if we can do this. The warg here costs you 2 magic and 3 fight in order to defeat. It's only worth 1 victory point. Your reward here is either 3 magic or you get a free peasant. That's pretty cool. There are a couple wargs, but as you beat the wargs, you get down to the frost ogre, which is harder to beat. You get through that. There's a 5. If there's 5 players, there's an extra frost ogre in here. And then at the bottom of the deck is the snow queen. The snow queen costs a ton in order to beat. Costs a bunch of magic, which can be difficult for players to get. You have to spend this all at once, this many tokens. Nets you 5 victory points, and also 1 domain, which I haven't talked about yet at all. But these decks get harder as you go down, so the trick of the game is trying to work your way through those. One of the big things that many of these do, I think this stack will do this very well. Whoops, that was the dire bear. In the base game, this Orc Chieftain right here nets you 2 gold for every monster that you've killed from the mountains. These are all the mountain monsters right here. The more of them you fight, the better your final victory will be. So one of the things you can definitely do in this game is allow someone to beat most of the monsters in a stack and then try to beat the leader and steal a whole bunch of victory points from them. It happens all the dang time. That's a big way to generate points, is by fighting monsters. That's where most of your points are probably going to come from. The other thing that you're trying to do in this game is get some domains. And so domains are all different. There's going to be a couple stacks of these, 3 stacks, 5 stacks. I'd have to look it up. But you're going to work through these stacks as well. And the weird thing about them is they have a big price at the bottom left that it costs to buy them. And up at the top right, it has some of these symbols that are also on our citizen cards. So this one requires you to have a citizen with a hammer at the top of it, and 2 with fancy hats with those leather helmets. So let's see, we talked about the hammers earlier. Knights have helmets, archers have helmets. The warlord also has a helmet. So if you have that combination, then you are allowed to purchase the Palace of Dawn. And the Palace of Dawn is worth 4 points at the end of the game, and also says during your roll phase, you may change 1 die by -1. You can drop it down by 1 number, which will allow you to activate the citizens you want. Excuse me. Immediately gain a citizen card that costs you or would cost you 3 or less. At the end of the action phase, you may turn 2 gold into 1 victory point. Immediately gain 5 fight, and you may slay a monster if you can afford to do it. These are all so different, and they really impact the game as you start buying these. These give you abilities that are constantly active and will change how you play. So not only are you gathering your basic resources here with your citizens, allowing them to get you all these tokens that you can spend up there on fighting monsters, but buying these domains will drastically change the options that you have available to you throughout the game. And you want to get them before your opponents do, and you want to get the ones that benefit you the most in the way you want. These are huge. One big thing about the game is also because some players are building different engines, there are people who will have a harder time buying this one. Like this is the Palace of the Dawn. It requires a hammer and 2 hats. If I know someone is going with a divine strategy and they're focused on magic, they're not going to have a hammer and hats as quickly as someone else might. So if I build my gold, I should be able to purchase that one before they can sneak it away from me. Fantastic. So I love this game. It's about point generation for sure, but at the end, you're just basically going to count up your monsters, you're going to count up your domains. Maybe you have some victory points, but the game doesn't actually come with that many because it's not a huge way to generate victory points. And then you're just going to add up your totals, and that's going to be it, except for the dukes. This game, like the Lords of Waterdeep, you have a secret duke that you are at the beginning of the game. And first of all, this is one of the things about this game that I wish was a little bit different. First of all, very cool. Like most of these dukes are Kickstarter backers from the first campaign, which is pretty cool. We got a huntress. We have my favorite one. Let's see if I can find it real quick. Is Miko the Monster Slayer. That is the main artist from the entire game. So it's cool that it got to be actually put into a game as an artist. That's fantastic. Down at the bottom, besides the name, it says at the end of the game, you score, and then blah, blah, blah. There's a whole bunch of stuff. Things that are important. One of them tells you 1 victory point for every 3 tokens that you have. Okay, that's cool. All of these have a bonus like that. Sometimes it's times 3, sometimes it's times 2, sometimes it's times 5. It will also give you bonus points based on the types of citizens you are collecting and the symbols that you have on your domains at the end of the game. So Lexander the Protector says you score 1 point for every hammer that you have and 2 points for every divine symbol that you have. So the more of those you're building up, the more points you are getting through your Duke at the end of the game, which is a pretty handy way to get a ton of points. And it also gives this game direction, which it really, really needs. I mean, it's hard to decide at the start of the game that what I want to do is have a divine strategy. The reason I would want to do that is because Lysander the Protector says, hey, if you do a divine strategy, I'll give you a whole bunch of points for all the divine symbols that you get throughout the game. As we all get different ones, we're all focusing on one of them. Miko the Monster Slayer gives you extra points for all the monsters that you fight. They're all worth an extra victory point. And if you beat the bosses or the brutes, you get additional bonus points, which is pretty cool. There's a couple of those. Some reward you for domains. I mean, they just give you strategies, which is what, many games like this need. It's one of the biggest things I like about Lords of Waterdeep is it's a big, wild worker placement game. I need focus, and the Duke gives me that kind of focus. All right, checking in real quick here on our chat. All right. Everything seems to be going okay there. No big questions on Valeria, which is good because we're about done talking about it. Things I love about this game, just to point out, I love the way the dice work. I love them. It's fantastic. Gives you so many options. It is rare that a turn comes up that you don't get anything. And in fact, if a turn does come up where you don't get anything, you get to take a token of your choice. So everybody's turn, you're always getting something. That is true unless you play this game 5 players, and I recommend don't do that. It's not a good idea. In that one, there's so many points that you generate that basically you have to take a break for a turn. If there's 5 players, every single round there is one person who just doesn't get anything. And it's not meant to feel punishing, but it comes across that way when you're the 5th player. You're like, why am I not getting anything? Everybody else gets stuff. It's like, you know, if these were actual Skittles and every once in a while I gave everybody Skittles except you, I just feel bad. So I don't like that. But 4 players, this is a fantastic game. I love this one. I play this one. I don't know, 2, 3, 4. This is one that comes out. And I would say that this game right here, if I want Machi Koro to be like a game that introduces you to the board game genre in a way, that's not a bad game for that. I think it leads you into some pretty complex strategies pretty quick. And again, every turn is good. This game, every turn is really good, but there's more going on. So this is a good one if people are starting to ramp up. Like if you were a gamer that enjoys the idea of games about making tactical choices, this is perfect. I love it so much. You're always active, and the game lasts, 45 minutes, an hour. It doesn't take all that long, honestly, which is pretty good for a pretty complex game. You get to start seeing strategies really quick. You immediately get to tell what other people are doing. Like the Butcher, for example, is a really, really good one to like bank heavily on because you get so many points on your turn. If your Butcher comes up, you just get a ton. I love doing Rogues. Rogues is a great strategy because when people roll 7s, I get tons and tons and tons of stuff. And so you get to watch people make their choices about how they want to approach this game. And I think it's a ton of fun. All right. So giving us a little bit of time. All right. Yes. Just like Lords of Waterdeep, but so good. All right. What I want to do now is talk a little bit about probability in this one. We've introduced both of these really well. And talk about the probability of 2 dice and why it is difficult for us to comprehend if you have to, and then we'll talk about the dice in this game, which is a little bit, more wild. So just real quick, like if you are used to probability, if you've taken it in, a class like stats or whatever before, then you may already know the answer to this. But taking a look at 2 dice, when we talk about probability, we want to think about the possible outcomes and how likely those outcomes are to come up in a game. And so if we are looking at these 2 dice right here, well, the possible outcomes, the lowest I could possibly get is 2, and the highest I can possibly get is 12. Great. There are 11 possible outcomes for these 2 dice. And the trick of probability here is that those, well, if I have 1 die, they're all equally likely. If I have 2, they're not all equally likely. Oh no. And yet calculating it gets kind of difficult because, I know that I could roll a 2 and a 1. Suddenly I have a total of 3. That's how I get a 3 is I roll a 2 and a 1. That's how I do it. But if I'm going to get a number like 7, well, I could roll a 4 and a 3. I can certainly roll a 1 and a 6. Okay. 2 and a 5. Great. There we go. 7, 7, 7. No problem. That seems like one more way to get a 7. So maybe is a 7 like 3 times as likely as a 4, or how? Okay. All right. Let's just break it down. Let's sort this out. Let's think about probability. The key to probability and the way to think about these dice in particular is to realize that you need to think about them in 2 different colors, because there are multiple ways to get the same number on these dice. For example, if I get a 1 and a 4 like this, perfect. That's a total of 5, right? But instead of getting the green 4 and the blue 1, I could get the green 1 and the blue 4. And I also get 5. And that is another possible outcome on these dice that are shining very brightly. So let's move to a slide. Whoops, a slide. These are all the possible outcomes in any game with 2 dice. These are the possible things that you can roll. Notice that there are 36 unique possibilities on this board based on whether we're talking about Rolling a green 2 and a purple 5 gives us 7, or a green 5 and a purple 2 gives us 7. 7 is absolutely the most frequent outcome on this board. 2 and 12 come up very, very rarely, right? But once you see all these options, you start getting a sense of how likely it is that a number comes up. Basically, what you can do is you can just add up these diagonals right here and take that total. So the number 4 comes up 3 times, and you just divide that by 36, and you get the probability of getting any one of those numbers. Probability of getting a 7 is still 1 in 6, right? If we reduce that fraction, we get 1 in 6. So you get a 6 on 2 dice. Excuse me. You get a 7 on 2 dice, exactly as often as you get any number on 1 die. It's still 1 out of 6. But 2 and a 12 are both very, very rare. So one of the things I like thinking about this is, excuse me, wrong one. Thinking about D&D, thinking about weapons and the way they work, because there are plenty of weapons. Like, for example, if you use a great sword, it does 2d6 damage. 2d6 damage. You roll these, you get your total, you add your bonus, whatever, blah, blah, blah. The most likely result is 7. It's going to come up the most. 12 is going to be pretty rare. Meanwhile, a barbarian running around with a great axe is going to be rolling a d12, and on a d12, all of those results are equally likely. So a 12 comes up significantly more on a d12 than it does on 2d6. In fact, on a d12, it comes up 1 out of 12 times, and on 2d6, it comes up 1 out of 36 times. So if you want to be doing massive numbers, you pick the great axe. But of course, you can also roll low just as often, and that's no good. The great sword gives you that sense of averageness. You have an expected value that means something, because it's a number that's going to come up frequently as you play that game. So what else do we got here? So when I was talking about Valeria, this is a game I've loved for a long time, and I was talking to Levi Moat, and he was like, tell me about how the probabilities work in this game in particular, because if you remember, not only does this result mean a 2 and a 3, but also a 5. And how does that change up the likelihood of these different citizens coming up? And so I took that challenge, just real quick to run through the whole thing. Oh my gosh. Whew. I posted this on my blog a little bit ago, but it seemed fun to talk about today. Given that normal probability table, we can also take a look at the way given faces come up in these different outcomes. For example, when we take a look at the number 3, there will be a 3 showing in 11 out of the 36 possible outcomes. And if we take those and treat those specifically, right, a 1 will be a possible result 11 out of 36 times, because that's how many times a 1 can show up. It's an odd number. Well, you can count. There's the crossover right in the middle, right, where the 3s both show up. And that doesn't... I'm not counting the number of ways it could show up twice. But if that comes up, a 3 does activate twice, which is very fun. A 2, of course, gains another possibility, because it can show up 1 additional time. And let's just... Oh, the 1 and 1, of course, will change that. And I believe the rest of this just adds those extra possibilities where the face doesn't show up. But we can get those numbers for 1 through 6. And then, of course, 7 through 12, those get back to the more traditional outcomes that we expect on the chart that we were looking at before on our regular probability table. Because the only ways to get a 7 are if they add up to 7. The only ways to get an 11 are if they add up to 11. I don't have to worry about those possibilities where the face is showing the number that I want. So this list down here is very, very, very unintuitive suddenly. And I love it because we get to play with that, right? I love it because Valeria gives us this, well, I know a 2 comes up more often than it should, but like how much more? Is it better to go with a 2, maybe a 3, than it is to go with an 11? I mean, the 3 costs me 3 gold in order to buy, whereas an 11 costs me, well, 1 to buy, so it seems cheaper, but will it come up more? Like, how does that work out? And again, a 4 is such a powerful one because a 4 can show up Not the most, 5 and 6 are the most, but other than that, basically the most. So it's a cool way to think about probability, kind of explore something that is a little bit less symmetric than the traditional, well, what happens with 2 dice? How does that work? How's my chances out of 36? Or how does a deck of cards work? Like that, you know? Yeah, so I find it a ton of fun to look at these variants, these interesting methods, these interesting ways to think about probability, because it's the only way that we can get better at probability is by playing with it. We need to get an intuitive understanding of probability. It's just even, I mean, I'm going to show this number again. Like, this number doesn't make sense in our brains, but if we are able to look at smaller versions of that, we will start to get the sense that when it comes to probability, there are more possible outcomes than we would expect. And that gives us this huge sense of randomness. What does randomness mean and things like that? We're just bad at it. We're humans. We look for patterns in everything. That's what math is all built on, is patterns, which is why a lot of mathematicians can't stand statistics and probabilities, because they are kind of breaking away from those patterns and showing us the chaos that actually exists in so many things. Valeria Card Kingdoms, where did my box go? Has a ton of chaos involved in it. And again, it has a very cool and unique game depending on the kind of monsters that you decide to have, the kind of domains that show up, the duke that you get. Your game is always different, but it always comes down to just getting so many of these tokens and just... Oh, I was going to drop them, but my coffee's right there. So hold on just a second. Felt good. Thanks. All right. I'm going to check the chat real quick, see if there are any final questions about these two. Looks like we have got good rundown. Good rundown today. I hope so. I hope that everyone is feeling good about these two. I do love them. These are 2 games that I have talked about in a little bit of depth before, especially Valeria, because it's just good. It's one of my favorites for years and years. I do love it. Definitely play it. They have now come out with, I think, their 4th different Valeria game. There's Quests of Valeria, which is... this is a tableau builder. Quests of Valeria is more like a Lords of Waterdeep style, but card game. So you are trying to complete all these quests. They're Villages of Valeria. And I can't remember what the 4th one is off the top of my head. I'm sorry, everybody. But check them out. They're very cool. Also, this game always has a ton of expansions that just add new monsters, new citizens, new domains, new options, new optional rules like agents are fun. There's a bunch of other stuff that's pretty dang cool. So play these games. Again, by Daily Magic. Check them out. Really, really good stuff. All right. So I think that is going to do it for our today's episode of Atomic Game Theory. The oven o'clock is telling me it's almost noon, which means our class is almost over. So real quick, of course, if you are a fan of game theory, if you would like to learn more, you can always read more about game theory at atomicgametheory.com, where I have posted a ton of essays and old videos. And of course, all of our Twitch episodes are also there, and you can check those out. You can also follow me on Twitter and most places at Armelina. And I don't know, I talk about game theory a bunch. I'm hard to shut up. It's a true story. Yeah. So, like I said, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for learning about probability. It is so terribly unintuitive. It almost makes me shiver thinking about it. But the more you are able to experience probability, the better you will be at understanding it, at intuitively describing how things happen in a probabilistic way, and the better you will get at games like these that have probability as their core mechanic. Playing these will help you be better at Catan, and Catan is totally a game, you can play Catan with almost anybody, and you can like shock them with how well you know the basic probabilities, which is always good. All right. Well, this has been fun. I will, of course, be back next week as we take a look at another pair of games and another mechanic that drives them. If you have any ideas for games that you would like to see talked about on Game School, feel free to send me a note on Twitter, because I'm open. You can see I have these games right now and access to plenty more. So I would love to pick some of the things that you want to talk about. And I guess Oven O'Clock says it's time to go. So I've been Richard. This has been a lot of fun, and I hope that we get to talk more about game theory in the future. Have a great rest of your week. Bye.